Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Michael, welcome back to your home radio spot.
It just doesn't feel right. I don't know. I don't know what to say about this. It's the normal time, the agreed upon time. We haven't been here in so long. It feels, like we got to break it back in.
Yeah, I mean, should we do a proper warm up? I don't know what the procedure is here. Do we just get into the football?
What I know is, I've been a radio guy for a couple minutes now.
Yeah.
I guess it's September. Last week was the first time I really lost my voice while doing the radio show.
Oh, that's awful when you're solo.
Man, we slogged through the week. It was a slog of a week.
So this was like a long-term thing, not like, have you ever lost your voice straight up during a segment?
Yeah, so my producer helped carry it, obviously, and we had stuff ready to go and guests, but there was one segment where we didn't make the finish line.
Yeah, Anthony, that is his nightmare. That if I lose my voice during the segment, because it's funny because there's a lot of producers in radio that actually are younger guys or gals that want to become hosts, and that's actually their dream. Like when I was a producer, that was my dream. I would like my host to all of a sudden lose his voice, and then I'd have to do the show, and I would be Lou Gehrig, and they would be Wally Pipp, of course. That was how it went in my head. Not, hey, we'll get a sub tomorrow. That's not you. He keep hitting your buttons, you doofus. This is actually Anthony's nightmare. This is something that comes up every once in a while. I have lost my voice for moments that Anthony's had to carry the show. Anthony, that is actually your literal nightmare, is that you would have to host the show.
Yeah, Anthony.
I mean, for 3 hours is crazy.
Yeah, Anthony, there's only one line you got to know, and that is, Craig's feeling a little something, so we're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Hey, that's a great line, too.
Yeah, we've all been there. All right, so the Commanders had about as good of a championship weekend, in my opinion, that they could have had. Of course, it'd be nice to hire the Super Bowl winning offensive or defensive coordinator if the Lions or Ravens won, or assistant head coach in Anthony Weaver's case, if that's the direction they want to go. But Michael, realistically now, every single candidate that they would like to interview is available. They can hire their coach this week. What is the latest that you are hearing, to take your radio host hat off and whatever is left of your reporter hat on? What is the latest in terms of what we're hearing in terms of a timeline, and how realistic is it that by the end of this week, and when we have you on next week, we're talking about a new head coach of the Commanders?
Yeah, I was laughing. This is actually my last formal week of duties for the Washington Times. I'll write some stuff when we're down at the Super Bowl next week too. But the new kid Liam that said, "Hey, looks like it's going to be your problem," as the Lions are up 24-7, and then it became my problem once again, which is not a problem because that's my job. That's what I do. By my count, we've got 7 in-person finalist candidates on the board. I've obviously taken Raheem Morris off the board for obvious reasons. He's been hired. You got the 2 Ravens guys, Anthony Weaver, Mike MacDonald. You got the 2 Lions guys, Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, Dan Quinn, of course, from the Cowboys, Bobby Sloak of the Texans, and Eric Bieniemy was given a full in-person interview in-house as well. I would be astonished if it's not Mike MacDonald or Ben Johnson, not in that order, Ben Johnson having the preference there. And I would be more astonished if this is not fully in the books by Friday afternoon when we all clock out. You don't need 4 days of deliberation on this. You've had weeks of deliberation. You get the in-persons with everybody wrapping up in Detroit tomorrow with Ben Johnson. They'll convene. They'll make their decision, whatever it is they want to do. I can't see any plausible reason you would need to take this into another week.
I wholeheartedly agree, which is why as much forward planning as we have done on this radio show, Thursday and Friday are completely blank slates as of right now. You've heard, I think you've heard kind of this, it's not defeatism, but this Inevitability. That's the right word. That's why you write in print and I sit here and blabber into a microphone. Although, don't worry, Michael, you're just about to be another one of us as your duties at Washington Times come to an end. There's an inevitability that this is spoken of, that it is going to be Johnson. But John Keim, who is as plugged in as anybody, obviously, and Adam Schefter, who is as plugged in as anybody, obviously, the ESPN brigade has come out and been like, no, like this is not done. We understand that everyone's just connecting dots here, but it has been made very clear that they are taking these interviews seriously, and this is not a foregone conclusion. And this group, the Harris Group, has been very secretive and had things very buttoned up. What have you made of both the pushback from some premier reporters that it is not a foregone conclusion and the general lack of information coming from the Harris camp?
Yeah, and this reminds me, there's a Simpson episode where Homer listens to vocabulary tapes and starts having like a really big vocabulary, but then he stops listening and he forgets what the words for everything is. That's going to be me after a couple of weeks of
I thought you were going to say that was just me right then, right now, because that would also be it. That was the problem, as I need to go back and listen to my vocabulary tapes. Anyway, Michael, continue.
Yes. Look, you've got different sources who provide different information here, right? And you are absolutely correct. The Harris Group is not forthcoming with details and information, and I commend them for that, right? Everything they've done, Craig, since I guess when they took over, has been designed to communicate to the public, the fans, we're not Dan Snyder. And this is just another way of doing that, is running a nice buttoned-up coach process where they take care of business quietly and professionally and bring somebody to a podium at the end of that process. That's not the way things have traditionally worked, so I think it's very important for them to do that. Now, the rest of the league continues chattering as normal, and of course we are tuned into that chatter and dialed into that chatter, and definitely the rest of the league thinks Ben Johnson is the guy to get. Now, I would say this, the only competition at this point is Seattle. I also think this is not going to be a cycle where Ben Johnson goes without a job. Assuming he wants an NFL job, he's going to get one, and I find it hard to believe he sat out this whole process not knowing he's got an option when the music stops and everybody sits down in a chair. You look at all the jobs that filled last week, and some of those teams would trade their guy for Ben Johnson right now, straight up. So that leads me to believe some communication has happened behind the scenes. I think it's also very important to respect the process, and that's your Adam Schefter reporting, right? Is they will respect the process and have an open mind as they go through these interviews. But at the same time, Ben Johnson is not still on the board because he's not an undesirable candidate. He is the desirable candidate. Obviously, MacDonald's giving him a run for his money right now. But in terms of him landing with a job, assuming he wants one in this cycle, he's going to get one. There's two left. That tells me he's got one of them.
Right. So then that brings the Seattle side into this. How big of a threat, realistically, are the Seahawks to win the battle for Ben Johnson?
Yeah, and if they want him, that could be a wild wrinkle here, and Ben Johnson's agent is going to be incredibly happy if that's the scenario, because you just add a couple more zeros to that check and that agreement and that commitment that they make. That's another spot, Seattle is, where you've got a really well-run organization. Obviously, the Allen family, Jody Allen's running that right now. There's a little bit of an ownership transition, but historically that has been viewed as one of the good spots in the league. So a last-minute bidding war would be very good for Ben Johnson, potentially very bad for the Commanders, but also I think that you would say they can still get a really good coach, even if it's not Ben Johnson, whether that's Mike MacDonald or somebody else.
Michael Phillips, of course, 910 The Fan, MP on the mic, and wrapping up his football season's worth of work for the Washington Times with us here on the Hoffman Show. I do think it's kind of funny the way the money works with this on the Commander side of it, because Josh Harris and company spent $6.1 billion, and that is cited as a reason as why they will now spend even more money, as opposed to being like, damn, now it's time to tighten down the purse straps because we just spent $6.1 billion. But it does seem like that is the case. Like, they spent $6.1 billion for this thing to return on investment, and they very much realize in order to have return on investment, they're going to need to do some more investing, is kind of my sense of it. Do you get the same sense?
Yeah, that's a great point. They're not going to get outbid. They're not going to lose Ben Johnson because they didn't pony up at the end when it matters. That's not why they're going to lose. I mean, if Ben Johnson ends up in Seattle, he'll have very legitimate reasons for wanting to be in that organization and wanting to participate with that group. One of those reasons will not be they offered me more money. You get to the finish line here. When you find your guy, you make it happen with your guy. Josh Harris knows how this works. He's done this in multiple sports now, in multiple leagues. The return on investment of a great coach is one of the underrated things in sports, right? You look at, we often talk about, boy, how great is that college coach gig? You go coach Auburn for 3 years, get fired, and they keep paying you for another decade. On the other hand, like Nick Saban, whatever they're paying him, I promise you that university made 10 times more than that on investing in Nick Saban over the years.
No, that's a great point. And obviously I think you're seeing now in San Francisco, obviously in Detroit and in some of these other places that have this incredible duo of lead front office person and head coach, right, and cohesive and all of that's how you win. And winning, by the way, makes teams a lot of money, and that's ultimately the goal, both the winning and the money. A few more minutes with Michael Phillips here. Anything else from championship weekend in terms of MacDonald and Johnson specifically, or Aaron Glenn or Anthony Weaver that you see that you think matters in this coaching search, or at this point the hay is in the barn and it comes down to these in-person interviews?
I'm not a huge believer in the final arguments thing of like, well, who did better on Sunday, go hire them. That said, Mike MacDonald, let's just take a second to talk about Mike MacDonald. 36 years old, all this guy did was pants Kyle Shanahan offenses all year. Like the smartest guy in football, like everybody, get me a Kyle Shanahan guy, run that offense. Every time he played one of them, he just dominated them and tore them to little tiny pieces. 36 years old, by the way. Very, very impressive. Plays Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes gets a couple out of the gate. They put up a big fat 0 in the second half, and that's not because they were sitting on the ball. That's because he dialed it up. I don't know if he'll be a head coach in this cycle. What I know is those results are pretty dang impressive, Craig.
Yeah, no, that is for sure. I kind of wonder if he, like, obviously if he gets an offer, it seems like he's going to take it. He could have removed himself by now, a la Ben Johnson last year. But the one thing that I find really impressive about Johnson is he kind of took this year to study becoming a head coach. That's something Campbell has talked about, is like Ben got a little more involved in some stuff, asked some more questions. He wanted to understand what it's like to be in that lead chair. And I almost wonder if he gets skipped over this time, it could be a blessing in disguise. And wherever he winds up next year is a job that he's more prepared. Like, obviously going to be more prepared, but if he can kind of follow the model that Johnson did, I do wonder if that winds up paying off for him. And also for him to like think about staffing and things that he's probably never thought of before. Like if I'm him, I try to do a little networking this summer, because that is my one biggest concern for MacDonald is like, who's his staff versus Johnson's got this tremendous tree because he's worked with under a bunch of different people with a bunch of different experiences.
Yeah, that's why I think MacDonald's not a terrible fit in Seattle. And if he gets that job, first thing I'd do is not fly to the facility, but fly to whatever vacation home Pete Carroll is in right now and be like, hey, you know how you're a senior advisor? What I want that to mean is, like, why don't you actually come be a senior advising me? If you could get that Pete Carroll hand-holding inside the building for a year, that would serve him really well at this juncture of time. And I mean, heck, that'd serve a lot of people well, not just 36-year-olds, but I can think of some older than 36-year-old NFL coaches who could benefit from a year with Pete Carroll too. But in terms of assembling a staff, if you could keep him involved, I think that would make the job exponentially more attractive from both sides for Mike MacDonald. But you nailed it. His star is not going to get dimmer. What he did this year, if he has a successful year next year, this isn't one of those one bite at the apple things. We talked about that. I know we talked about that last week with Aaron Glenn, where, hey, look, he may never get another shot at this. If he was offered a job, he probably needed to take it. I don't think that's the Mike MacDonald story at all. He can be picky, a la Ben Johnson, and it would serve him well in his career.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, last thing here with Michael. Next week, by the way, we will preview the game more. When, by the way, what's your Vegas schedule? When do you get there?
So we get there Sunday night. So I will do the Monday show in Vegas. I don't know if you want to talk to me Monday night. We'll I'll have your people call me. I know you book up well in advance, but
I think what we'll do is we'll try to just tape it. Sorry to the audience, Michael might not be live, but the information will still be just as good. But we could just have you. We can set up a thing from Radio Row, and we can do it that way.
Oh, during the week while you're there.
We could do that, or I was going to say we can get you from your broadcast position. I'll sit in my home studio and we can tape a bit on Monday, or we could just shift you to later in the week and you could join me on set.
We'll make it work. Media Night Monday does not start until 8 p.m. Eastern. So there should not be any time conflicts there, which is good news for all of us. Yeah,
so we could either do that or we could do live on your way or from whatever you're doing between the end of your show and 8 p.m. Anyway, the thing I wanted to ask you about, we can plan next week off the air. I'm the one who did that. That's my fault, just to be very, very clear. But the other kind of NFL news from the weekend is the Eagles hired Kellen Moore, and obviously they got Vic Fangio. I think everyone's going to look at the Fangio hire and be like, yep, A+, got it. You hired the godfather of modern NFL defense. Good job, Nick Sirianni. What do you make of the Kellen Moore hire?
I'm really glad you mentioned this because I do have a take. I like it. I like it a lot for the Eagles. I think that if you're going to have a CEO coach like Sirianni, right, everything rises and falls on your coordinators as we learned last year into this year. And shoot, I mean, Detroit's going to go through that next year, potentially, have to, weather that or see how well Dan Campbell hires. But I like both of those hires. I still like the roster a lot. I still like Jalen Hurts a lot. I know that's not what the audience here wants to hear, but I think I saw the Eagles as like 30-1 to win the Super Bowl next year. I am bullish on that right now.
Might be able to find someone in Las Vegas who can take some money on that bet. I've heard that's a place you can do such things. I like Kellen Moore a lot. I like the Eagles a lot. I'm going to be honest with you, Michael. I don't love the fit.
Yeah, you can. That's your right as a radio host.
I will say if they had hired Arthur Smith, I would be a lot more scared.
Okay, I like that. Little difference of opinion. That's what makes good radio here. Kellen was the rising star a few years ago. Didn't quite pan out that way. I think he's still got, some fire in the tank. And I mean, the Fangio thing you mentioned, obviously, it goes without saying anybody is better than Matt Patricia at this point. So if they had named a wet paper bag as their defensive coordinator, I would still be lauding that move on the air because it is not Matt Patricia.
There is an incredible competition for worst Belichick assistant.
You're not wrong.
I mean, from what Charlie Weiss did, I think Weiss and Patricia are the 2 1 seeds, but there are other candidates. I mean, McDaniels, but at least McDaniels went back. Every time he goes back to New England, he's an incredible OC. Now, granted, that was with Brady, but still, he did it. He's got a bunch of rings. Weiss left New England, never good at football again. Patricia left New England, never good at football again.
You're telling me, a University of Kansas graduate, proud Jayhawk?
Michael, I covered a Charlie Weiss season.
Charlie Weiss.
I was in Lawrence for one of those.
Yes.
It's 6 months of my life I'm never getting back.
Turner Gill owes that guy the biggest thank you of all time for not being the worst Kansas football coaching hire of the 2000s.
Oh, that is, speaking of lists, the Belichick assistant list versus Kansas. Man, that's a summer show for you, sir.
The Venn diagram meets at Charlie Weiss.
It sure does. Michael Phillips, everybody, 10 a.m. to noon weekdays on 910 The Fan, which you can, of course, listen to on the free Odyssey app or on your car radio if you're driving down through Richmond. Michael, whether it is from Radio Row or on Radio Row, we look forward to talking to you next week. Safe travels out to Vegas, and I'll see you there.
Looking forward to it, Craig. See ya.
This is The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.